Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Supergirl fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss his classic Supergirl run and the new KRYPTON Saga is writer Sterling Gates. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm so happy that we could connect and get you on here. I hope you're good at taking compliments because I'm going to be heaping a lot of praise on you for your work on that Supergirl run from 2008 to 2010 and the new KRYPTON Saga in and of itself, but especially the hand that you had in its remapping for the current line of omnibus collections. I cannot thank you enough for this. It's on my shelf. I couldn't be more thrilled.
When they contacted me to say they were doing one, an omnibus, when I talked to them initially, it was only 2 volumes. And then as we got deeper into the conversation, I said, guys, there's a lot of issues. They showed me their map and I said, there's a lot of issues that are missing. It might need to be 3 volumes. And then they were like, well, how would you map this? If you could map this, how would you do it? Because they had done it, and I've talked about this publicly, so it's not a state secret. They had just taken the list of trade paperbacks and sort of plugged everything in trade paperback order. But the way we designed that story, when it was coming out weekly, there were triangles on the covers to try and keep track of all that stuff. But even the triangles were a little off because certain stories would take place between the pages of certain issues. And so I dug out all 130 some odd issues from my closet. And I sat down and reread all of New Krypton in about a weekend. And then I emailed them and said, look, let me take a crack at mapping this whole thing because I can see where Nightwing and Flamebird are in Lois Lane's apartment. They leave. Literally the next issue that should be in that thing is Supergirl and Lana coming to the apartment to talk to Lois. There are so many things that that had never been collected like that before. And so I made my case and they very graciously allowed me to take a crack at remapping that whole thing. And so knock wood, I think the first volume has sold pretty well. And so volume 2 is going to include a lot of stuff that has never been collected before in the context of New Krypton. When the last conversation that we had, we're trying to figure out how to map in Jeff Johns' Adventure Comics stuff with Superboy, because they reintroduced the Legion of Superheroes in that story, which plays out across the last New Krypton pretty heavily. So you kind of want those, and it reintroduces Connor Kent because he had been dead and then had been resurrected. So we wanted to we want to get those in there so that the whole thing feels, like the entire story that it always should have been collected as. When we were initially approached, and I think I've said this publicly too, when we were initially approached about collecting it back in 2008, this was always the plan, was to mix and match the volumes so that issues would fall into a certain order and you would read it like one big saga. Unfortunately, because of collected editions back then, which were some great human beings, no shade intended for them. I don't know that they got that memo per se. And so they collected everything as its own volume and then slapped the New Krypton spine on it and called it a day. And so I was very happy that DC was interested in doing an omnibus and that they, again, very graciously allowed me to go through and remap the whole thing with them. Really good people, really, really good human beings in collected editions right now. So I'm glad you like it. I'm glad it reads well. That was my main concern. Once it came out, was I hope I didn't do anything wrong. I hope it reads okay.
No, well, first of all, I'm glad that they were receptive to you engaging in that process. I can imagine something like that might feel like a thankless task. So let me say thank you. Not that I speak for the fandom, but if anyone's the target audience for this, I feel like it's me. And I really appreciated the effort that went into it. I was curious before I cracked it open because I was aware certainly of those triangle numbers that adorned the covers of the individual issues. And I was curious if it would essentially follow that or if it would deviate further. And it did. And I was so impressed with the way that it's all laid out. I mean, just to give folks a little bit more context, you included all of the lead up material, like the Coming of Atlas and the Brainiac storyline. But even with the Brainiac storyline, about halfway through, we have your first issue of Supergirl, where we have that article written by Kat Grant about why the world doesn't need Supergirl. So I could tell so much thought went into this. And as far as how it was originally collected, you're preaching to the choir, because honestly, that kind of killed me back in the day. I talked about this on the show a couple of years ago when we covered New Krypton. So coming out of Infinite Crisis 20 years ago, I made the decision to switch from reading monthlies to waiting for the trade. And by and large, that served me well. Not with New Krypton, though, because I had that exact experience of trying to follow along, but essentially reading the individual titles as they were collected. And I did hit a bit of a wall, and it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I reread it using the collection on the DC app, which had it laid out by triangle number order. And it was a world of difference. I had so much fun. We talked about it. I sang its praises. It was just such an immersive, fun binge that made such wonderful use of the vast cast of characters and really built out this world of Metropolis and a degree of interconnectedness we hadn't seen since earlier in the Triangle era. I mean, it was an absolute blast. So that was a great way to read it, but I'm really excited now as these omnis hopefully continue to come out to dig into it again that way.
I think you'll be very surprised at where some issues fall. Again, like I should shout out, there's Alex Galler at DC and a guy named Jeb Woodard at Creative Apocrypha. Like I worked with them primarily on remapping all that stuff. I think you're gonna be very surprised at how some stuff falls. Like one of the biggest shocks, I think, for people in Volume 1 was Clark goes to New Krypton and he joins the military, and then there's 6 issues of Supergirl. Because in World of New Krypton issue 2, Clark is like, Kara, where the hell have you been? And she's like, I was on an errand. And like, if you haven't been reading Supergirl, that line makes no sense. And so to me, it was important that it's going to feel weird because there's a giant Who is Superwoman slots in between those 2 issues. Like triangle wise, I think like Supergirl, Who is Superwoman ended up being, it's a 5-month-long story. So like when Superman World of New Krypton issue 5 was coming out was the end of that Who is Superwoman story, which again takes place before World of New Krypton number 2. So putting all that stuff into an order, like I think really helps recontextualize a lot of what each character is going through on this very sprawling journey, and then the Nightwing and Flamebird stuff. That stuff can kind of get a bad rap sometimes because Greg really dug into the religious aspects of Krypton. And I think if you're reading that like in one big chunk, it's a little overwhelming because it's a lot of information, a lot of exposition. You get deep into the Kryptonian Bible and stuff. But if you're reading it when it's like you're bouncing from that and then you're going to a Supergirl issue and then a Superman issue, and then like when you're seeing all that stuff kind of play out in the other books, it's going to feel totally different than how it did reading it in one hardcover volume. So I'm looking forward to like Volume 2 coming out and seeing what the fans make of it. And then Volume 3, Volume 2 is the one that like bounces around a lot because we were juggling a lot. And then once you get to Volume 3, it should be a pretty straight shot because it's like all of Last Stand of New Krypton, all of War of the Supermen, one epilogue issue, and then a whole bunch of back matter that we dug out of the archives. Hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully all that stuff makes it in. Because they're limited on space with these omnibus. You only have 1,000 pages or something, and you do the math of if it's 136 issues at 22 pages an issue, like how many? It's a lot of pages. So, but yeah, I'm glad that you said that. I'm glad you're getting a chance to really reevaluate that work. I'm hopeful that people reevaluate that work because we were always very proud of what we'd put out, and I think it got so sprawling. I think the readers just didn't really know what to make of some of it. And so this is a chance for them to kind of go back and sort of see. This is a chance for them to go back and see what we had in mind as we were doing all this work. And doing these conference calls every week, trying to like make sense of, okay, this issue takes place here. Like, what should I write to reflect your issue? And James and Greg and I were on the phone pretty constantly through that 2-year period. And then we'd have these big writer summits in New York, and that was very bizarre. Like I'd spent some time in New York, but nothing like that where you're like in the DC offices for a week, just like big whiteboards. And it was like, the meme of like
Charlie,
the guy from
Always Sunny?
like it was like that giant like board trying to connect all the dots and make sure everything lined up. Um, and we worked really hard on it for a number of years, and we had a very big plan for the climax of that story. And then we showed up to a writers summit, and they told us, "Look, you have 1 month to wrap up this entire story. It'll be the free comic book day issue." Great. Which was exciting because the opportunity to write a free comic book day issue was not lost on me. Um, but then it was like, and now you have 5 issues, 5 weeks basically to wrap up all of your subplots. And it was like, well, but this is meant to be a 6 month long company-wide crossover. And they're like, we're not doing that. Like, it's not selling well enough for us to take the plunge to make every book reflect the Kryptonian War. So you got 5 issues. Good luck. And then that's where we came up with that, like the 100-minute war, which was the brainchild of Alex Segura. Was just like, what if the whole thing's in 100 minutes and every issue is 20 minutes? And so that sort of became the touchstone for us for plotting that. But yeah, I mean, like we had a big plan for the ending, and we got to accomplish a lot of it, but not as much as we wanted to.
I will say, having gone through it on the app within just the past couple of years, and I say this to the audience wholeheartedly, still well worth a read, even if the ending didn't get to play out as planned. But my heart does go out to you, knowing that you had that ambitious scope for the finale, and then it had to be truncated. For me, the biggest heartbreaker was Zod, because it was such a fascinating presentation of the character, and seeing this tentative alliance between Clark and Zod. Not that I necessarily thought, oh, they're going to be buddy-buddy forever, but it was just fascinating to kind of sit in that pocket for a little while. And then I felt like, yeah, very quickly we had to sort of reset Zod to more of that default. And that was the one aspect, I think, more than anything else, where it just kind of broke my heart, because I was all in on that dynamic. And I would assume that would have been able to breathe a bit more across the finale you had planned.
I will tell you this story, and I will not use names, but a certain executive, we were on a conference call with a certain executive at DC, and we were explaining our plans for the 100-minute war. Where General Lane is really the villain, right? Like humanity, like the story of New Krypton is about humanity's distrust of the other. And like from the human side, Clark and Kara's side is different, obviously. But like, it's a lot about humanity distrusting the Kryptonians. So General Lane blows up New Krypton, which reflects a lot of things happening in the real world sometimes, going back through America's history. He chooses to blow up New Krypton, and it's the first strike, and Zod retaliates. So who's the villain in that version? And we kept talking about General Lane being the villain, and this certain executive who will remain nameless started shouting at us. I was just like, Zod's not the villain? What do you mean Zod's not the villain? Zod's the villain. You have to make Zod the villain. Zod is the be-all, end-all Superman villain. You have to make Zod the villain. And we tried several different ways to explain that that's not the story that we've been telling for the last 2 years. And they were not having that, and felt like, we had tricked them in some way. And so after a lot of shouting at us, we finally ended on, okay, we'll find a way to make both sides look bad in this nuanced tale of Zod and Superman and General Lane and Supergirl and Lois, and we'll find a way to make it work. And so that's sort of where things landed. So some of the criticisms that I've heard over the years are justified, but some of those criticisms are, you're playing in someone else's sandbox. It's your job to incorporate the story details that they want to see, because they're the boss. They're buying. You're a freelancer. I was 29 years old. Like, what the hell did I know? And like, they're paying me to write these stories, and okay, I'll write these stories the best of my ability, and we'll try to make sure everyone gets good moments. And Zod will be a villain, and General Lane will be another villain, and Superman and Supergirl are caught in the middle. And that's how it shook out. But I wish I could say that everything we did was a success in that story. I think a lot of the things that people run up against and really don't quite understand the choices. I wish I could say that all those choices were mine and take responsibility, but they're not. You're playing in someone else's sandbox when you do corporate comics, and that's their choices can override yours in a heartbeat. And in the instance of Zod and Clark and their instant split, and Zod being movie version Zod versus comic book version Zod, like that choice was made above us, and we just executed what was given to us.
I hear you, and I appreciate the insight. And I know you've talked about this, but just for our audience's sake here, and I think this has been generally known, but the reason for the truncated ending was to usher in Straczynski on Superman for his Walking the Earth storyline. Yes?
Yes. Correct. We had a bunch of stories to follow up New Krypton. I like Supergirl went sort of unscathed in that because Superman in Action had a big hard reset, and that was never the plan. And so I kind of skated through on Supergirl unnoticed for at least a couple months. And then I got to that Bizarro Girl story, which was my version of following up on Supergirl's involvement on the New Krypton War. But yeah, like Straczynski, took over Superman, and I think Paul Cornell took over Action Comics. I think,
yes.
Right? Like,
yeah, for the Black Ring storyline with
Lex going after the Black Ring. Golly, that's so long ago. Just for listeners' sake, like, please bear in mind this is 16 years later. Like, it's been a hot minute since we were doing these books. 15 years, I think. So. Like Straczynski had a take, and rather than put it in a miniseries and let him do whatever, they decided to make it the main Superman book, because at that time, that's sort of how you sold the mainline books, was put a big story in it, put a big creator on it. That will sell much better than if we do it as a miniseries. And now I think the market's changed pretty significantly, and miniseries are not looked down upon in the same way they were 15 years ago. So in hindsight, they probably should have made it a miniseries and let him do whatever he wanted with Superman, and then we could have done the wrap up to New Krypton and really addressed a lot of that stuff that is left hanging. New Krypton doesn't have a ton of cliffhangers, but it has a few just dangling threads that. But having said all of that, a year and a half later, a New 52 came in and blew up the entire universe. So would it have mattered anyway?
Very true. I always talk about how that relatively brief 5-ish year period between Infinite Crisis and the New 52 is a real sweet spot for me. I really enjoyed the stories during that time. Yes, I agree. I think Grounded would have been better served for miniseries for a variety of reasons. But actually, circling back to what you were saying a moment ago about hoping that now New Krypton gets reevaluated, gets new eyes on it with these new Omnis. I know it's only been out a relatively short amount of time as of this recording, so maybe this hasn't happened yet, but I'm curious if you've been hearing from fans about that first collection, whether they're fans who read it the first time around or in particular new fans. Like, what sort of feedback, if anything, have you been getting so far, like on social media?
A couple fans have reached out, but I'm post-COVID, I've receded from the internet. Like the 2010s, I was very on the internet, and 2020 was, 2018, 2019, I was working on a big TV show, and like I didn't want to be on the internet at all, just because it was added noise to an already stressful life. So, and then once COVID hit, I was like, I don't necessarily want to be available to people 24/7 like I have been. But I've seen some posts about it, and I've seen some YouTube reviewers, because the internet has changed since 2010, and now like comic reviewers aren't doing articles on websites. A lot of them are doing YouTube reviews, and I've seen a couple YouTube reviews on New Krypton that have been very positive. And there's a typo on the back cover. One guy was like, "Oh, there's a typo on the back cover," and it's like, I'm sorry, like the proofreader missed one thing. You don't understand the amount of work, the hundreds of hours of work that it was to get this book out and make it look as good as it did. So sorry we had a typo, but for the most part, I think people have been pretty happy with it. And again, I think for younger readers that haven't encountered that story, like it is a giant Superman story, and it's sprawling and epic, and we try to hit all the main characters. And it starts with Krypto, which since the movie has come out, like Krypto is sort of back in people's minds. And so it starts with, Krypto and Superman playing space fetch. And I think that is just such a insane starting point for such a giant story that I really think people kind of fall into, oh, this is what this is it's just big. And we were trying to tell a really big story, and that Brainiac story that Jeff did is ginormous. And then once you get into New Krypton, like the focus, narrows drastically. So it's Superman and Supergirl focused from the jump. And then you're sort of off to the races, and you're seeing all these things occur through Superman and Supergirl's eyes. And then later Nightwing and Flamebird as they're introduced in the story and then brought to the forefront. And then the reveal of who Nightwing and Flamebird really were, was a big moment there too.
Yeah.
So
No.
yeah, I think people are really, I don't know. I hope people are enjoying it. Like if you're listening to this, like I'm on Blue Sky. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I'm on Blue Sky. Like shoot me a message or an @ or whatever we call it now. It used to be tweet. Send me a tweet on Blue Sky and tell me if you're enjoying reading this stuff, especially if you're reading it for the first time. Because I'm so close to that material. Even 15 years later, like I'm still so close to it. Like I don't have the most fresh point of view on it. So
Yeah. No, look, from my perspective, it's a gem. I hope more people continue to come to it. I will say, even just from our own little corner here, the Digging for Kryptonite audience, I've definitely seen excitement and enthusiasm for it. I've had a few audience members post photos of themselves with the omnibus. So
cool.
Yeah,
Great.
no, it's a wonderful thing. You were hitting on this, but just to confirm that this is planned to be 3 volumes, because I think the original solicit was like for volume 1 said, the first half of the new Krypton sagas are like 2 volumes, but we're aiming for 3. Yes.
I mean, I'm gonna preface this with I don't work at DC.
Sure.
I don't work in collected editions. I'm at their mercy. If they decide to try and cram it all into a second volume, great. We designed it to be 3. As far as I know, as of this recording, the plan is to make it 3 volumes. I think that initial solicit that you read, they have to send out to bookstores almost a year in advance. They have to send out solicits to them before comic book stores. And there's information in that solicit that isn't even right. Like it talks about collecting issues that don't even touch New Krypton stuff. So I think that solicit has always sort of been nebulously wrong. But like, I also don't think they're going to go back and change the solicits. They're just going to release the books and call it a day. As of this recording, we have not solicited volume 2, and I haven't heard what the plan is for that. So maybe it's once every fall. Maybe it'll be later in the summer. I don't know.
This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. My comic shop closed over a decade ago, but if there's one place where I feel that same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw, yeah. Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye out for it. We'll be looking forward to it. And I have to say, I mean, in addition to having the material and presented in the proper reading order, man, the back matter is awesome. I enjoyed your introduction as well, but that back matter, the original series Bible, the original pitch for this, there's some interesting stuff in there. I don't want to, we could spend the whole time just talking about that. I don't want to, I want people to pick it up and read it for themselves. But there were a couple of things that I just wanted to ask about. So one thing that obviously didn't end up coming to fruition, there was this whole coma arc that would have involved Mixus-Pitalik. And what was particularly fascinating was that he was going to make a play for Lois and Clark's marriage, a la One More Day on the Spider-Man side. But Lois and Clark would not have gone for it. But then he was going to take the marriage, spoiler alert, of Pete Ross and Lana Lang.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating. I was fascinated by that.
The problem with that story is that we were trying to do it too soon after the New Krypton crossover, where in the New Krypton, it's such a hard, it's such a big setup for Clark and Kara and Lois to immediately launch from that into Coma, it's a lot like For the Man Who Has Everything. But by doing that so soon after New Krypton's crossover, you're not really getting an opportunity to like build New Krypton out as a world and build New Krypton out with all these new characters and like that would feel like we were missing a beat was the thinking. So we had pushed Coma to later because we realized we didn't need to, like, Lana and Pete. Far be it from me to talk smack about Pete Ross fans, but like, did anyone care if Pete Ross was married to Lana at this point in their continuities? And the answer is kind of no. So it didn't really have the emotional impact that we wanted it to. So that story kind of got kicked down the line a little bit because you wanted to have Clark goes to New Krypton. Clark like learns that he has to be part of Zod's army. Like, you wanted all those big beats with New Krypton stuff before you got to the threat of dissolving a marriage. And then we just never got to it. Like it fell to the wayside, and we couldn't find a good way to get Mixie in there. Within the context of like the big sci-fi stuff that we were doing, like having Mixie show up felt wrong in places. And so that story just got kicked down the line, and then eventually it's like, do we even need this story? Like, do we even need to have a threat to Lois and Clark's marriage while Clark is living on New Krypton and coming back and forth? Like, do we need to have like, is this breaking up their marriage? Do we even need that question to play? Because I don't think Lois would ever like, oh no, Superman's away. Okay, I don't think she's going to be like, I'm pining for someone else. I want to break up my marriage. That's just not really the character, especially in that time frame. Like, she understands that Clark's going to New Krypton because he has work to do. And like, he gets back and he's like, Zod's on there, like really messing stuff up. And she's like, go deal with that. Like, I got this. And so I just, that story just fell to the wayside. Like, I mean, I say this all the time, like, comics is a graveyard of good ideas, where like good pitches, where there's so many good stories that we've wanted to tell and tried to tell, and just either the people, the powers that be don't like it, or something falls apart and we decide not to do that story. I mean, there's hundreds of stories. I have, on my laptop, I probably have 100 Supergirl stories that I want to tell that I'll never get the opportunity to tell. Just because once you're in deep with these characters, your brain just goes and goes and goes. And you want to spend the time giving these characters the best stories possible. So sometimes some of these stories fall to the wayside and they're just behind you, and then you move on and keep going. So Coma was a great idea that just was never going to come to fruition in the timeline that we had in that back matter, in the Bible, the New Krypton Bible. But it was, we talked about it a lot. It came up a lot that first year of, when do we do Coma? When's Coma happening? And it just never happened. But I'm glad people are getting to see that, like the plans for it, in cold black and white. You get to see the plan for it.
No, that's the thing. Like, I totally understand how and why it fell away. Even before you explained it, even just reading it, I could understand, and even more so getting your insight. But yeah, just to be able to know that was part of the plan was really cool. My last couple of New Krypton questions, then obviously we'll segue more firmly into Supergirl territory. But I think in that Bible, there was a bit at some point about Sam Lane and some sort of black ops scenario that perhaps would have accounted for how he faked his death during our Worlds at War and returned and all that. If I had one nerdy fanboy quibble as I was reading and talking about New Krypton, it was that aspect of it, because Triangle era, Loeb Kelly era, that's the sweet spot for me. And during that time, Sam Lane, a bit of a jerk, not necessarily warm and cuddly, but not full on outright villainous per se. And he makes this heroic sacrifice. It's an atom blast in DC in front of the White House during our Worlds at War. And so the whole time, I'm like, how did he survive? Like, how did he become that? Was that something that, I mean, I guess maybe I have my answer from that Bible, but was that something that there was an intention to tease that out a bit more and show how he got to this point?
Yeah, we had plans. One of the things that I wanted to cover in Supergirl was like the Lois and Lucy relationship, right? Where Lucy has become this like villainous, superpowered, crazy person. And we're jumping way ahead. Like post New Krypton, Lucy Lane was a villain. Like she's the last scene we wrote was like her and Lois having this like stare off in Star Labs, and Lucy's like she's melded to the Superwoman costume, and she's like stuck with all these like Kryptonian powers that she doesn't want. I wanted to do a story that would have involved the two of them, Lois and Lucy, dealing with the fact that their father was who he was in that story, while also learning why he became this thing, and also dealing with the fact that like, and this is where Supergirl plays, like at the end of New Krypton, spoilers, sorry if you haven't read this, at the end of New Krypton, like Supergirl stands by while Sam Lane offs himself. Like, and Lois is really pissed about that because like Supergirl moves at super speed. It felt like to Lois that Supergirl had made a choice to not intervene. And so it was going to be a wedge between them, a friction point, along with all the stuff that had happened with Lucy. And so the story would have been the three of them coming to grips with kind of each other. Like Lucy and Lois were going to be cool, but Lucy was still going to hate Supergirl, and Lois was still going to have problems with Supergirl, which was leading into this Death of Supergirl story I wanted to do in Supergirl 75, where Lucy as Superwoman forms the Supergirl Revenge Squad, and they kill Supergirl. They're successful in Supergirl 75. Like, it's all of the Supergirl villains that we had taken and built up, led by Superwoman, and she kills Supergirl outright, dies. And then the end of the issue is Supergirl wakes up and she's in hell, like the DC version of hell. Like, and then the next few issues was going to be the fallout of all of that, obviously. And then Supergirl, and again, comics is a graveyard of good ideas that never got to be in a book. Supergirl, while in hell, was going to hook up with Allura, who had died. And then the two of them were going to discover Linda Danvers' Supergirl, who had been trapped in hell at the end of Reign in Hell. And then the three of them were going to get out. And then Allura makes a big sacrifice. I had a whole thing for it. And then Allura makes a sacrifice to get Supergirl out of hell while she stays, blah, blah, blah. And then when the smoke clears, Supergirl was resurrected and Linda Danvers was alive again. And then the intention was we do a Supergirl book, and then they kick the shit out of Superwoman and save the day and all that stuff. And then the intention was Supergirl, Linda Danvers, Peter David Supergirl, would have hung around the book as a new character, given a new code name, not Supergirl, obviously. Or maybe now you'd call them both Supergirl and just, there's two Spider-Men or whatever. But the intention was like, if on the spectrum of Superman characters, if Superman and Supergirl are on the middle, dealing with both super science and super magic, Steel covers super science on that spectrum. And then on the other side, Linda Danvers deals with supernatural stuff on that spectrum. And then suddenly you've got a lot more story opportunities because now you can do Supergirl stuff that addresses the supernatural side. And then I had in my like things I want to do file folder was Supergirl and Linda Danvers Supergirl helping Silver Banshee break the Silver Banshee curse. Was their first big team up story that I was going to do. And this is all like, but then again, the New 52 came along and knocked over all of these characters. So none of this matters. But that was the intention of like Sam Lane, to take it all the way back to your question. So like Sam Lane dies in New Krypton, and then spoilers, and then Lois, Lucy, and Supergirl have a story with the three of them accounting for that and dealing with that. And then, I was fired off that book, and that story will never see the light of day. So
damn, I'm feeling a couple of things at once. On the one hand, I'm like, this is so cool. And I'm so jazzed that I'm getting to hear this. And then at the same time, so annoyed that we didn't get to see this play out, because Honestly, that sounds so cool. You know, we talk a lot about the Matrix Supergirl, the Earthborn Angel Supergirl of Peter David, and that really exists in its own little pocket there. But what a cool way to have incorporated that iteration of the character with Kara Zor-El. I remember back in the day after Peter David's final arc on that Supergirl series, Many Happy Returns, he talked about wanting to do a Supergirl equivalent of Birds of Prey. I think he was going to call it Blonde Justice. So it kind of was reminiscent of that. Oh man, for whatever it's worth, I would have loved to have seen that.
I mean, the problem was like the powers that be and Keith Giffen, rest in peace, Keith, but like they hated Linda Danvers a lot. And so like Keith very pointedly planted her in hell and left her there on purpose, being tortured by demons or whatever is the last time we see her. And it's like, we have a perfect opportunity. We can build an opportunity to get her out of hell. And I'd pitched, you know, throughout New Krypton, I'd pitched Linda Danvers as alive. Like there was like one day, and I mean that literally, there was one day where Linda Danvers was going to be Flamebird, and the powers that be, we called the powers that be to pitch them, and they said absolutely not. So, you know, it hurts in a lot of ways when I don't know how do I say this politely. It hurts when people in charge don't like a character, because then they don't want that character to exist. And that's very hard because you're trying to serve fandom, which is massive, especially Supergirl fandom, which is very particular about what Supergirl they like. And, you know, Supergirl, happily, much like Superman, has had many different phases and many different iterations across the last 60 years. Every version has a fan. Every version is someone's favorite version of Supergirl. And I was trying to sort of have our cake and eat it too by incorporating a character I really liked, Linda Danvers, into a world that we were doing, which was a lot of sci-fi, and she was a supernatural character. Can we bring supernatural into the sci-fi and make it work? I felt like we had a good plan for it. But again, if the people above you at the company don't agree with that and don't like a character, then you're dead in the water. But we tried to bring back Linda Danvers a couple different ways across a couple different years, and repeatedly ran up against the roadblock of executives above us. So, you know, sometimes it was tough. I just was trying to keep my head down a lot of the time, honestly, and just like I just want to write my book, and you know, like it's a different take on the character than has existed before, and as long as my sales don't tank, I think I'm safe. And then I wasn't. So
gotcha. We don't have to dwell on your leaving the book, but was it
no, let's dwell. I've already dwelled plenty.
I'm just curious, was it the sort of thing that you pitched this story that you just described and were told no, and also you're done? Like how did that play out?
No, those are two separate events.
Gotcha.
I think I was writing the Annual 2, which was the Legion of Superheroes story. And I got a call, and they said, hey, we have good news and bad news. The good news is we're moving you to Firestorm. The bad news is we're taking you off Supergirl. And I said, there's no Firestorm book. And like, well, he's coming back in a big way, post Brightest Day. It's going to be big. We're going to launch it. You're going to get a #1. It's going to be huge. We're going to put an A-list artist on it. It's going to be giant, but we're going to have to take you off Supergirl. And I said, oh, okay. In hindsight, that was all a ploy. Like, that was all just them firing me and trying to like give me a nice consolation prize. But then the consolation prize didn't fucking happen. And so I was very upset because I had poured 2 years of my life. You know, again, I'm 29 years old at this point. Like, I'm a kid who's never had a big job collapse around him. And I was distraught. Like, I was very torn by it because I had poured so much of my life into this character who I loved, and my thank you for it was, here's Firestorm, which is a book I loved and a character I like, but like I wanted to keep building Supergirl into the bigger character I knew that she could be. Like, I wanted to build her into the character that like people were excited to go to the comic book store and read. Firestorm is a built-in audience. Firestorm has had fans since started in the 70s. Like there's a whole bunch of people. I know a guy with a Firestorm tattoo. There are bunches of Firestorm fans in the world. Supergirl was not a book that people necessarily went to get every month excitedly. A lot of people would read it out of obligation, or when it started, it was a teenage TNA book. Like, and no offense to those artists, like they knew what they were doing. It was very like that volume of Supergirl was pitched and came out as early 2000s a teenage TNA book, which is what the market was then. Like that's and I didn't want to do that. And Jamal Igle, who drew almost every issue of Supergirl I wrote, like he didn't want to do that either. And we'd had a lot of conversations about how to make her feel more legitimate. And that context is weird now because it's 16 years later. She's had a TV show. She's got a movie coming out. She's got a giant best-selling book on the bookshelf stands. But like in 2008, when we started, that wasn't the conversation around this character. Like one issue, and again, I mean these creators no harm, but like one issue literally has her bent over a table, looking over her shoulder, saying, "Don't look at my S." And like that's clever wordplay and fun, but like, is that the book that you want to give a teenage girl to read? Like, does that feel like a legitimate choice to give a younger woman to read for a hero character? And the answer is no, because at that point, the market was men ages 18 to 34. And so they did a TNA book to appeal to them. And that's fine. It just wasn't the thing that I wanted to be doing. So we worked really hard to sort of pull it out of that mindset into, she's a teenage girl with every problem of the world on her shoulders. It helps that she can fucking pick up the world. Like she's the strongest teenager on earth. What does that do to you mentally and your psyche? You've lived through a war. You watched your parents get murdered. Both parents were murdered by the same man. Like Reactron killed both of her parents. What does that do to you psychologically? Does he give you nightmares? Like, and he's dead, thankfully, but like, is he haunting you? I wanted to address a lot of that stuff. Like I wanted to talk about that stuff and really dig into like the psychology of trauma on a teenage girl. And the powers that be were not ready to do that. So, and that's fine. And so, the classic line that Jamal and I talk about all the time was a certain executive said that I was writing that book as if Supergirl was a 43-year-old woman. And so that was literally the day that I was fired. Was like that was, I was fired on a Friday because you want to fire people on Fridays. And then that weekend, I think, or maybe the weekend after, that executive was at a convention and said, we're no longer going to have a Supergirl written like she's a 43-year-old woman. And so I was like, oh, that's what you think of what we're doing, is like, we're trying to legitimize this character and make her feel like a character that young women can look up to and like can be a shining example of heroism in the face of a world that doesn't necessarily value you. And you think we're writing her like she's a woman in her 40s, which, by the way, what the fuck is wrong with you that you think that? Sorry, I'm cursing a lot.
It's okay. We'll put up the explicit tag. It's all good.
What's wrong? Well, I don't want to demonetize anything.
Don't worry about it.
I know cursing can be a thing, but like, what's wrong with you that you think that people don't want to read anything from a woman's point of view? Like, and I'm a dude. Like, I'm trying to write this book and make this book epic and cool and big, but also deal with the emotionality of being a superhero, which is a thing that in the 2000s people weren't really focusing on. Like, and so it was a bummer. I mean, it tore me apart. And I tweeted about it a couple of years ago. Like, I went to Subway and I bought a foot-long meatball sub with extra provolone, and I just sat in the parking lot sobbing to myself, eating this Subway sub, going like, what did I do wrong? Like, that they want me off this book this badly. And then like I finished my sub and I threw the wrapper away, and then I was like, and then what the hell do I have to say about Firestorm? Like, what's my way into that book? I don't even know. And so, and that would have been, just timeline wise, that was 2010, middle of 2000, August, September of 2010. So And then the New 52 was September of 2011. So there was only 1 year left for that character. Like, so none of these stories would have even existed because they would have all been wiped by. And there's a lot of solace in that too, of just like any plan that I have would have been blown up by New 52, like any plan. So,
Gotcha.
I'm lucky that I got to at least finish the story that we were telling with Cat Grant, and we did Day of the Dollmaker parts 1 and 2, and I got to like put a punctuation mark at the end of our run. What really sucked was they lied to Jamal, and only until I made that tweet about crying in the parking lot with the Subway sub, which was I think 2017 or 2018. Only then did he find out that I'd been fired because they told him that I was choosing to leave. And they asked him, "Do you want to stay on without Sterling?" And he was like, "Absolutely. If Sterling's going, I'm going." And then he and I, for some reason, and I still don't know why, we'd never talked about it. And so I called him and I was like, "Yeah, like you didn't know that?" And he's like, "Absolutely not. Like they straight up lied to me to keep me happy." And I was like, "Well, did they offer you Firestorm?" And he was like, "No." And I'm like, "We could have done Firestorm together. Jeez."
Unbelievable. I mean, obviously, we're not naming this executive, but if you know DC at that time, you know who we're talking about. It's so frustrating to hear all of that. And I guess on a positive note, it's like all these years later, in your run with Jamal, man, it holds up. It stands up all this time later. And we just did our episode on Woman of Tomorrow. I was telling you this off mic, but we had an audience member ask, like, is Woman of Tomorrow the only good Supergirl story? And I was like, no, like, it's definitely not. And I held up your run with Jamal as such a bright spot. And I had an absolute blast over the past couple of nights. I reread your entire run because I wanted it fresh in my head.
Cool.
I was curious though, because I wondered how it would read in isolation, not as part of the new Krypton saga. And it still worked great. Now, obviously I had the benefit of knowing the wider context, but honestly, it still worked great. I had an absolute blast with it. The characterization first and foremost, and, kind of going back to what you were saying before about the direction you took the character in. I don't know if you're a Community fan, but I always think of that line. Annie's pretty young. We try not to sexualize her.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you could move the character in the direction that you did. And I think hand in hand with that, the other core aspect of that run that just really stood out to me was who you surrounded Kara with. We're used to stories with Clark and Lois and Jimmy and Lex, but then when you extend that orbit of characters to put her into contact or conflict with Cat Grant and Lana Lang in particular. Like, I thought that was such an inspired use for both of them, particularly Lana, because we've seen over the years, boy, she's occupied a lot of different roles. And I appreciate the fact that over time, creators have tried to find spots for her. Some work better than others. But here, as this mentor / sister figure / pretend aunt to Kara, who poses as Linda Lang. Like, I just thought that was such great use, and positioning her as the business editor of the Daily Planet, like just working her into that world. Because I've looked at the history of the character, and this is definitely a use of Lana that really, really stood out to me. And Lucy as well, going back to that character as well, like finding this whole other villainous avenue for her, just really, really worked for me.
Thanks. To go back one, I'm going to address that, but let me go back one step. Like, executive, it's been 16 years. So like, it's water under the bridge. Like, I don't want people to think I'm, still sobbing into my Subway sub, but like,
Sure.
I think that executive is often only painted as a villain. I think he made a lot of great choices and he was very good to me. I don't want to generate a bleeding cool headline based on Sterling Gates is mad at former DC executives, but like the DC executive suite, the C-suite was very good to me overall. They made a lot of choices later in my DC days that didn't always work out, and that's what it's like working in corporate comics. So I hold no ill will. It is what it is. I wish those stories could have seen the light of day. They didn't. It's not a thing that I like ruminate over nightly as I drink a bottle of scotch or whatever. So I don't want people to think that. Like, I don't want your listeners to think I'm still bitter.
No, totally hear
you. I was 29 years old and I got fired off a job, and that really fucking sucks and like really hurts your feelings, especially when you feel like you've been doing really good work. and I still stand by the work. Like I think the work that Jamal and I were doing was really great. Like from my point of view, again, fandom can take it any number of ways, but like I was really proud of that work and felt like we were really making strides to legitimize a character that had been only sexualized the last 5 years. She pops out of that spaceship and she's naked for a whole issue, like when we reintroduce her as a character, and it's like, and that's hard. That's hard for young women to come into a book. You hand someone some of those early books, and young women are opening up, and it's just super rail thin, naked Kara. And I just we worked very hard to elevate her out of that. And I think the powers that be didn't necessarily respond well to that because they'd worked so hard to take her to that direction. So, but again, like that's me supposing. I don't have firsthand knowledge, so I just want to clear that. Like, I have no ill will towards these people. Like, it was a million years ago, and a lot of life has happened since then. It just hurt my feelings when I was in my 20s, which, if you're a listener and you're in your 20s, there's a lot of emotions. Like, you're going to go through a lot of emotions, especially the first time you lose a job that you love. Because that really takes your heart right out and steps on it. So, anyway, sorry to go back to what you were saying. Supporting cast. Yeah, man. Like I made one of my goals was, can we do a DC comic starring almost all female characters across the board? And the male characters are supporting cast only or bit players. So with the exception of Inspector Henderson, like and Jimmy Olsen a couple times, and like Gangbusters in 2 issues.
He sure is. I love
Gangbusters. I do too. Jose Delgado. It's primarily a female-driven book starring women dealing with problems in a different way than you would do in a Superman book, or you know, any other Green Lantern book. I mean, like I really was like, how can we take all of these amazing women supporting cast characters that the Superman mythology has, Kat, Lana, Lucy, Lois, all those L names. I was trying to figure out how to get Lori Lamaris in there, but I could never make it work. How do we take all of these characters and put them in one book and make it feel like it's fun to read and it's something different, and like it's not solely testosterone driven, which 2000s a lot of comics were, and that's just a product of the market at the time and what people were trying to get going. But that was 20 years ago. Like the market's totally different now. Everything's different now. But I just wanted to like explore some of these amazing supporting cast characters that had not been seen in a million years. Cat Grant had fallen off the map essentially. Jeff brought her back in Brainiac. And so I read the first issue of Brainiac and I was like, can I use Cat? Like, can I take her and make her? And he's like, yeah, I had this really funny idea for her and Supergirl to meet. And I'm like, oh, do that. And then I'll echo that, 3 months later in my first issue. And then I at that time I was working as Jeff's personal assistant. I had brought him an outline for an issue for what would have been my first issue. Like let me back up one step. I was writing a spec issue of Supergirl to show DC I could do that book, just to give them an idea of what that would be like. I'd done some writing for DC for a year, and like they were looking for a Supergirl writer. I wanted to do that book, so I was going to write a spec issue. I took Jeff my outline. The whole issue was about Supergirl and Lois, and then it ended with Cat Grant publishing "Why the World Doesn't Need Supergirl," the article. And Jeff read the outline, and he drew a big circle on that, and he goes, "That's the start of your issue. Go from there." And I was like, "Oh, that's a great note." And so I outlined the issue, and then over one weekend, I wrote a 22-page comic that initially ended with Supergirl going to Lois and having that she goes to Clark's apartment, and Lois is there, and Lois gives her the pep talk that she needs to like deal with Kat's article. I sent that in. They called me and they were like, "We really want you to take over Supergirl. The problem is you can't use Lois, so find someone else to use." And I was like, well, what's Lana Lang doing? And at that point, Kurt Busiek was writing Superman. And they were like, well, in Kurt's run, she's in charge of LexCorp. I'm like, oh, okay, so I can't use Lana. And they're like, well, we could probably get her fired. And so like she gets fired from LexCorp like 2 months before I start or whatever, a couple months before I start. And so my first issue was like, Lana is dealing with a loss. Supergirl is dealing with no one has faith in her. The two of them fight each other and like pick each other up. And like, then they become sort of a unit. But then New Krypton happens. And so Lana becomes the human touchstone. And Allura is she's like the good mother figure and Allura is the bad mother figure. And so you got to have like bounce back and forth between those two worlds. So like Earth became Kara's safe space that she could go to for advice and sisterhood and New Krypton became like, it's a perfect nightmare. Like it's everything she's ever wanted to get back, and then she gets it, and then it's, no, there's probably a better metaphor, like a poison chalice. Like it's everything she's ever wanted, but then she gets there and she's like, this is nothing like what I want. My mom is psychotic and she's really angry at Earth for murdering my dad and subjugating the Kryptonians and forcing us to move to this crazy planet. Like, so she goes back and forth between Lana and Allura as like the two mother figures in her life, or sisterly, I guess, with Lana's case. But interesting point of fact, they couldn't use Lana Lang on the Supergirl TV show, which is when they created Alex Danvers to be that type of character for Kara.
Okay.
And then they wanted to use Dollmaker, but they couldn't, so they made Win. They made it. They wanted to use Toyman's son, but they couldn't use Dollmaker because Dollmaker was at that point a Batman villain. There's a nebulous thing, so they created Win. They made Win that version of that character. So they pulled a lot of stuff from what we'd been doing in the books for the show. But yeah, like the goal was always to surround Supergirl with an amazing supporting cast of women, both good and bad, and then see what that's like. Because we've read a million comics where it's, one male character surrounded by male characters at all times, and maybe there's a love interest, maybe there's a mother figure, but like I had never read, and there have been some since, a superhero book that was just women. I wanted to fucking read that, and so I pushed hard to make that and was able to do it for a couple years.
I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. Yeah, it played great. The whole New Krypton Saga, and you address this in your intro to the omnibus, crediting Jeff Johns with not just reintroducing the classic bottle city of Kandor, but enlarging it and now bringing it into conflict with Earth. It's one of those things where it almost would have been enough with that Brainiac storyline if it gave us the one true Brainiac and the classic Kandor, and I wouldn't have been shocked if that bottle city literally went back on the shelf in the fortress like we had seen pre-crisis. But to actually play it out and put both Superman and Supergirl in this position of being torn between two worlds, it was so dramatically and narratively rich. And I guess historically, I've always really been laser focused on the Superman part of this story and him being torn between these two worlds, the world that he grew up on, versus the one that he's only ever known in a very limited capacity, and gaining access to that world at the exact same time he loses one of his most fundamental human touchstones, his father. But then you have the other side of it with Supergirl, where at the end of your first issue, she's putting down these roots on Earth, becoming Linda Lang and moving in with Lana and all of this. And then now we have New Krypton and her mother and father initially. So yeah, I mean, it worked to such great effect. I loved the backstory. We got the contrast between Zor-El and Allura. I loved seeing the background of their courtship on Krypton. I talk about this all the time, but as a father myself now, with the young son, it's like anytime we deal with the parent-child dynamic, it always resonates. And when Zor-El does meet his end, and he has his final moments with Kara and talks about how happy he was that he got to see her one more time, just absolutely resonated. So I really loved all of that. I can't say enough good things about it. And circling back to the Lucy Lane of it all, and what you had said earlier about previously being more active on social media, I took screenshots of some of your previous comments on this. So you had pitched a Superwoman miniseries with Lois coming out of all of this. Yeah.
I pitched a Superwoman mini that, like, again, I really wanted to address like the Lucy, Lois, Supergirl stuff, and like I had pitched a miniseries. Yeah, I mean, again, this is 15 years, so let me pull up the files in my brain. Like, I pitched a story that was basically like Lois has to be Superwoman and like put on the Superwoman costume and like get all the Kryptonian powers and do a bunch of stuff to try and help Lucy, to try and get Lucy like unscrewed up, like to make Lucy human again. Because I always wanted it to be like Lucy puts on the suit, gets the Superwoman powers, it goes wrong, she's stuck with the Superwoman powers, and then Lois is the person who helps her get out of having the Superwoman powers permanently and makes her human again, so that she would have to put on the suit to have the powers going forward. Like literally make the suit the thing that is the evil in Lucy necessarily, so that she has to put it on to start to do stuff. While at the same time, so that's like the plot, while at the same time addressing the emotional stuff of Lucy's, like, emotionally, Lucy is very scarred, and like her dad has killed himself. There's like an amazing amount of trauma happening there that she's trying to process through. And Lois, by doing all of this external stuff to try and help Lucy, would help resolve some of the internal stuff that Lucy is dealing with. And then something was going to go wrong, and it would set them again at odds, so that then Supergirl can come in the main Supergirl line and make all that put it all in the pot and make a good soup out of it, you know? So it was a pitch. It didn't get past the pitch phase. You know, I wrote it up. I sent it in. They said, "This is great. We're not looking for more New Krypton content at this time. This feels too much like a New Krypton miniseries, like a New Krypton follow-up miniseries, so we're not going to do that." You know, that was a couple months before I was let go, so I assumed that my fate had already been sealed at that point, and they were just like, "We don't need another Superwoman thing going." So, you know, it is what it is. But like, there was a lot, you know, again, I wanted to really delve into that relationship, Lois, Lucy, Supergirl. Like, it's a really interesting triangle to try and get through, because they all have reasons to not like each other, or have reasons that they want the other person to like them. And so, like, dramatically, that sets up amazing conflicts, so like amazing emotional conflict for these characters. And, you know, it's what it never happened. Again, comics is a graveyard of good ideas. Like,
Gotcha. Nerdy continuity question. So pre-Infinite Crisis, and obviously we had not seen much of Lucy Lane, but previously she had been married to Ron Troop and they had a baby.
Mhm.
Are we to assume Infinite Crisis kind of wiped that away, or was that still potentially part of her backstory?
so I wrote two versions. Supergirl Annual 1 has the secret origin of Superwoman. I wrote two scripts. One was addressing Ron Troop and the baby and dealing with that. One didn't have it, and I sent it to editorial and said, "You guys choose. Which one do you like?" And they chose to make it cleaner, to not address Ron Troop or before the baby. And then I think it became a throw. Maybe there's a throwaway line somewhere in there about, her dating Ron Troop at some point. But I think you can safely assume Infinite Crisis did away with that relationship, unfortunately. But
Gotcha.
I like servicing fans, like, because I grew up in a comic book store. I was and am a fan, and so I like making sure that we're covering bases, even if it's just the tip of the hat here and there. And so I was on vacation actually writing the script, and so like I wrote one version that was Ron Troop focused, and then on the plane back I revised the middle of that script to pull Ron Troop out of it, and I sent them both in on a Sunday, and then on Tuesday I think they emailed me and said, hey, like, we're gonna go with the one that doesn't have continuity stuff.
Very interesting. Obviously, you don't have to say, but in the alternate version that we didn't see, is it perhaps the idea that after, and this is part of what we did see, that Lucy really went down this darker path after Sam Lane's supposed death, was maybe part of the idea that also that led to a parting with Ron, or did you have a different take?
I mean, now that's a specific I don't remember.
Gotcha.
I'd have to. I mean, I could dig out that file somewhere. I mean, I think I wrote them getting divorced, and he got custody, and then she re-enlisted. I think was how we did that.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, I can see that. Yeah.
Like, the thing that I remember most, just because I'm a Pearl Jam fan, is in continuity, their first date is going to a Pearl Jam concert. So like, I had a thing about Pearl Jam in the script. And I was so psyched to put it in a comic script, and then they chose the other one. But I mean, man, like, you're asking, that's a deep cut.
I know. I'm sorry.
It's a deep cut for an issue that didn't happen. But I think I had written them getting divorced, and he'd taken the kid, and she had re-enlisted. But I that's a deep continuity cut that I paid homage to in some way, and then editorial chose the direction. So.
Yeah. No, I'm just fascinated to hear about that alternate version, just that you wrote two iterations of that. I guess last continuity thing, not a question for you per se, but I don't know if you kept up with any of the new history of the DCU that just came out within the past. Okay. Yeah, so we now have this revision to that Superman, Batman, Supergirl arc by Jeff Loeb and Michael Turner, where now, instead of, as we originally read it, it was the reintro, or for the characters in that particular continuity, the introduction of Kara Zor-El, cousin from Krypton. But now we have it that it was the original pre-crisis Kara Zor-El who was resurrected by Darkseid during that period of time. I was just curious if you had any reaction to that.
I mean, my reaction was cool, and I moved on.
Gotcha.
I mean, like, and that was reflected in the Supergirl in Sophie Campbell's Supergirl book too. Like, that version is reflected, but I think they're doing that. Like, I think there's a very interesting story to tell about Darkseid, like, trying to trick Clark, and like, if the Kryptonian ship isn't like, that whole story can play. It's just the reveal towards the end is that the Kryptonian ship was constructed by Darkseid to fool Clark or whatever. Like, you can make all that fit within the continuity of it. The only difference is, like, characters' response to Supergirl showing up is now, oh yeah, like, you're back, you're alive, instead of, who the fuck is this? Like, so it's not like that big a change. I do like it because it puts a lot of pre-crisis stuff back on the table to use. Sophie Campbell's doing Night Flame in the main Supergirl book right now, and Night Flame's one of my favorite villains. I appreciate that. Like, I always love putting all of DC continuity back on the table. Like, I think that's a really fun way to address that these characters have been around for 80 years. And you can kind of pick and choose what works and doesn't work as needed. But yeah, I mean, I read that and I was like, okay, great. Like, that's where the continuity was. I mean, there was not a new Krypton reference, Mark Waid, but oh well, is what it is. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm thrilled that at least, like, those stories happened, which means probably a lot of my stories happened in continuity. It's just a question of how and when. Like, Sophie Campbell, who I can't say enough good things about, like, has in the first 5 or 6 issues of the current Supergirl book recontextualized Supergirl being a soap opera star and a camera person, like all these like 70s Supergirl continuity things. And it's like, oh, so now we're opening the DC universe back up again. It's no longer New 52 is the only continuity. Now it can all be continuity. You know, Grant Morrison did that to great effect with Batman, where he read every Batman story, and suddenly he can pick and choose what Batman stories were or weren't continuity, and that worked out really well for that Batman run. So like, why not do that for all the characters?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to ask generally about your Supergirl fandom. I know you've talked about the Helen Slater movie being your first exposure to the character at a young age, foundational. And then once again, we were talking off mic and I was referencing the introduction you wrote to Supergirl in the Silver Age Omnibus Volume 2, where you talked about having read virtually all of Supergirl's comic book appearances, which is awesome. And I take it that wasn't something you did to bone up before your run. Like my sense was that had been part of your fandom, or I was curious about that.
I saw that Supergirl movie on VHS in 1986, 87. I mean, I don't know exactly when the VHS copies dropped. My parents brought it home. I remember that. My parents brought it home. And then my dad had bought the comic book adaptation. I loved comic book adaptations of movies when I was a kid, like loved them. And so it has an amazing Jose Luis Garcia Lopez cover. And Joey Cavalieri did the script of that comic adaptation. So like I watched that movie. I distinctly remember watching that movie while laying on the floor reading the adaptation as the movie's playing. So however old I was then, 5 or 6. And then I got really into Daring New Adventures, the Paul Kupperberg book, Carmine Infantino art, which is such an odd mix, Paul Kupperberg and Carmine Infantino. I loved that book a lot. Her death in Crisis, I've talked about this before, like her death issue in Crisis was such like a what do they call that? A canon event? What's in the Spider-Verse movies? They call it a canon event, right? Like where something is like so formative that it's like her death in Crisis was a canon event for me because she dies and the next issue the Flash dies, and those were my two favorite superheroes. And so that like 1-2 punch was like, well, DC Comics are the greatest things ever. Like I'm feeling so many emotions. And then as I like moved into my teen years, you know, Peter David's Supergirl was running. I loved Gary Frank art. I loved Gary Frank art. So I was like really buying that book initially for the artwork. And then I fell out of comics completely. Like I started playing guitar and I was a teenager with, you know, I had 3 different bands. I had a heavy metal band and a grunge band. And like, I just got into playing music. And so that's all I did. And then my dad died. We owned a comic book store and my dad died and we sold the comic book store. And in getting rid of the comics in the comic book store, I rediscovered my love for Flash and by extension Supergirl because I went back to Crisis. And I was like, oh, this meant so much to me when I was 10. What's it like reading it at 17? And it was the same deal. And I was like, well, Supergirl's pretty cool. And then like I think it was like 3 or 4 years later, Loeb was doing Loeb and Mike Turner were doing that Supergirl story. And I was like, this character rocks. And so I had in my closet from childhood all those Daring No Adventure issues and you know, the movie adaptation, which has never been collected, by the way, which is baffling to me. Like I actually like, I know they collected, reissued Batman 89's comic adaptation. Like you could just do a book of comic book adaptations of DC movies. And I think people would buy it. But yeah, like I got really into the character at that point more than I had been. But so like foundationally, yes, big fan. Had I collected all the Silver Age issues? God, no. Like, I was also super into the Legion in the late 90s, the reboot Legion. And so I started buying the original Legion issues, which there's a lot of crossover, especially the Action Comics and Adventure Comics stuff. There's a lot of crossover with Supergirl there. So I was picking up some Supergirl stuff there. And then when I got hired on the book, I was like, well, now I have to pull a Grant Morrison and read all the things. And so I went back and dug through and blew through all those issues. it helped that Jeff had a giant comic collection, and I was at that point again, I was working for him, so I could dig through all of his Action Comics collection. Um, and then I set out and I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy every Supergirl appearance from 19. I want to say it's like 1965. It might be 66. I want every Supergirl appearance from 66 to present, and I spent a bunch of years doing that. And then during the pandemic, I fell out. They didn't publish the last two issues of, I think, volume 6 of Supergirl. They just are digital only, and I was like, oh, the run is broken. And so I think I'm a few issues behind on keeping up with every Supergirl issue from, but like I have a pretty full run from the 60s to present. With I'm sure there's probably little holes here and there, but like I worked pretty hard to make sure I checked everything off the list.
Now that's
But
awesome.
yeah, I don't know. I hit a point where it's like I believe in this character, and I'm going to work my damnedest to make sure I'm doing the best job possible. And if that requires me to read 200 back issues, so be it. Like, because I don't want to encounter a moment where, as a fan, I don't want to encounter a moment where I don't know something that I should know. As a writer, I don't want to encounter a moment where I do something wrong that a fan gets pissed off because I missed an issue. And so I wanted to be sure that I was servicing as much as I could, as best I could, so that no one would ask me about Ron Troop and Lucy Lane. And yet here we are, all these years later. I just wanted to be sure that I knew my continuity well enough to feel like I was writing the book to the best of my abilities. And it helped that I loved that character and had a foundational love for that character, and always had. I mean, like I point to that Crisis issue. The shame of Supergirl to me is always that her Crisis issue where she dies is the most famous thing that she ever did, you know? But then again, Superman dying is the most famous thing he's ever done too. So, and Supergirl did it first. So
Very true. But yeah, no, that passion, that attention to detail is apparent, and it translated to the page. And I'm grateful for it. I appreciate it, and I really do hold up your run with Jamal Igle as such a bright spot. And honestly, at this point, I'm still relatively early in terms of making my way through a lot of that material that you're talking about. But I do find that your run and that take on the character is the one that I do continually now circle back to, gravitate towards, as far as kind of what I hold up as my ideal presentation of the character. With New Krypton in particular, did you ever get any sense there was any interest in potentially like an animated adaptation or anything along those lines? Because it feels so well suited for something like that. No.
I mean, I'd love to see it be a movie someday. Like, I think we're building, if Brainiac is the villain of Superman 2 Man of Tomorrow, and we're putting Supergirl on the table, like, to me, it makes sense of maybe there's a crossover movie with the two of them doing New Krypton stuff, but I don't know. No, I mean, no one ever asked me about doing it as an animated series, though I would say yes in a second. At one point, I did have a conversation with someone about trying to figure out if there was a Supergirl Batgirl crossover movie, like animated movie, that could be fun. I don't think that conversation went very far, but I had a conversation at one point. And I just, there are many, how do I say this politically? Hollywood is a graveyard of good ideas that never came to fruition. So if there were conversations about New Krypton animated, I was never a part of it. Maybe James was, maybe Greg was, I don't know. But it's, I would do it in a second. I think it'd be fun to do. I think it's such a sprawling cast of characters, and you could tell some really fun stories. I actually like DC's, we're doing all this anniversary stuff. And it'll be the 20th anniversary of New Krypton real quick. And so like, I think there are a couple cool miniseries you could do about, Supergirl on New Krypton, Superman on New Krypton, even Nightwing and Flamebird. They never went to New Krypton. There should be a story where they go to New Krypton, and we get to see Krypton through Chris's eyes. And Thara, once she left New Krypton for Earth as Flamebird, she never really went back, because they were there to seek out the Zod's sleeper agents. So she never got to see New Krypton again. And then she dies in the sun. Spoilers again. and then she dies, so she never gets to see her homeworld again. There's a very cool story where if Supergirl comes to Earth and teams up with them to find Reactron, maybe Nightwing and Flamebird go to New Krypton and have to team up with Supergirl to find something. I mean, like, there's a million different ways you could take all that stuff. It's just, is there an audience for it? And I don't know the answer. Comic audiences have changed drastically since 2008, 2009. So I don't know.
No, well, any of that I would be on board for. But yeah, I keep coming back to this idea of an animated adaptation. Obviously, we got, I guess maybe the closest was Superman Unbound, which was an adaptation of the Brainiac storyline and featured Supergirl prominently. But yeah, I mean, a full-on adaptation would be amazing. I guess as far as other ideas or pitches, you tweeted about this a while back. I guess a dream project of All-Star Supergirl. You described it as 12 issues in an annual, 12 self-contained stories exploring Kara that culminate in a massive finale showing why Supergirl is so important to our world, all new threats, all new friends, 12 A-list artists drawing the Girl of Steel, Jim Lee on covers. Is this something that ever got as far as a formal pitch?
I don't want to say. I mean,
gotcha.
like,
fair.
it's my dream project, and Jim's never done a cover of a Supergirl book, as far as I know, and I always thought that'd be amazing to have him do one. He's drawn Supergirl a couple times, but always in like a Wizard magazine and always in different contexts. Yeah, I have a story for it, and I want to give 12 artists one opportunity to show the Supergirl as they see her. Because in being a long-term Supergirl fan, I've had a lot of conversations with artists of who is your favorite character at DC. A lot of them say Supergirl's in their top 3, and it's like, oh, I'd love for you to draw an issue of a Supergirl story. I'd love to get a couple artists that no one's expecting to draw a Supergirl story. I've reached out to a number of artists and they've all agreed. So like, I have a list of people who would be interested in doing it, but DC is not. The last few times I've spoken with DC editorial about Supergirl projects, I have sort of met a wall because they have their creators that they are working with right now, and I'm not one of them, and that's fine. Is what it is. I would still love to do that book someday. I would love to just do a Supergirl project someday. Like, that character is near and dear to my heart, and the last time I got to write a comic was the Supergirl TV show tie-in book, Adventures of Supergirl, which was 10 years ago. So, she's a character that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and a lot of time like imagining stories for, and any chance I have to write her, I will take. I got to write her some on the TV show. I got to write her some on The Flash. We did a couple crossover episodes with her, and I got to write some stuff for her. And Melissa Benoist, incredible Supergirl, incredible human. All-Star Supergirl is a story that I've had for a couple years in my back pocket. It really is like, I need 12 great artists, and 13 really if I want to do the annual. But like, I want to tell a year-long Supergirl story that is self-contained. Every issue is self-contained, but building to a bigger piece, kind of like what we did with Adventures of Supergirl, which was 5 issues that led to a big 6-issue climax. Same idea, just done bigger, and it involve other characters. With that Adventures of Supergirl book, I couldn't involve other characters. It was just characters from the Supergirl show. Let's do the DC Universe version of that, and let's see what it's like when she interacts with each of these characters. And sometimes is one issue a Lois Lane team up story? Is one issue a Superman like things like that? Again, I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to tease you with a project that might never happen. But I have a story that I want to do and I've always wanted to do, and I think now as the movie is marching towards the box office, there's plenty of space to do more Supergirl projects, I would hope, but I'm not a corporation, so what do I know?
Well, I would love to see it. So if and when it ever happens, I'd be there. I'd be there for it. But the last thing, I guess you've already answered this in talking about the current Sophie Campbell run, but I was just curious. You talked about everything that you went through as you left the writing of Supergirl, and I was curious what it's been like to go back to being a fan and whether it's possible to go back to reading the book after having written it. But it sounds like you've gotten to that point. Was it something that took a little while, or were you able to shift back into that fan reading mode relatively quickly?
I mean, it helped that they rebooted the universe. You know, after me, Nick Spencer wrote one issue, and then James Peaty wrote the rest of his story. And then Kelly Sue DeConnick wrote, I think, a 5 or 6 issue story. And then it ended and then rebooted with Michaels, Johnson, and Green. And then Green left, and then Johnson kind of hung on, and then Perkins came on. And those issues, I mean, she was a totally different character. It was a totally different take. Kara was a different version of Kara. And I think that made that easier to be a fan. It also helped that, like, I loved the creative teams, and like I was rooting for them just as much as I was for the character. And so, like, you know, James Peaty, wonderful human being. Michaels, Johnson, and Green, super great guys. Perkins is awesome. Like, I wanted those books to succeed. On top of, I love this character and I want the characters to succeed. Like, if you truly love a character, and this is my 2 cents, if you truly love a character, once you leave the book or are forced off the book, whatever happens, I understand that some creators get very angry and bitter. And I couldn't do that with Supergirl because I'd spent a lifetime liking those books. And then I knew all those creative teams, and I wanted them to be successful, and I wanted the character to be successful. You know, I gave Mike Johnson an idea, like, freely, of just like, here, I had an idea for Fortress of Sanctuary. You should go do that. Like, and so he put the Fortress of Sanctuary in the book. Like, I don't care. It's a cool idea. Kara deserves it. She deserves her own fortress. Run with it. I've done a lot of work behind the scenes that no one will ever know about to help try and keep that character relevant, whether that's just conversations or, like, you know, pitching her and stuff in on the CW shows, trying to get her in different places. I wanted to be sure that she was well serviced in Crisis. So me and the other Supergirl TV show writers worked very hard to make sure Kara was elevated in the Crisis crossover at all times. The Flash movie, I was their Supergirl consultant. Like, I want to make sure that she is handled well and is a source of inspiration for not only young women, but just for people in general. She means a lot to me, and I want to be sure that we are telling good stories involving her for mass audiences. So to answer your question, like, is it hard for me to read those versions? No, absolutely not. Like, I'm psyched to see Sophie do such a great job on that book. Is like, oh, like, this is a fun Supergirl book that we haven't had in a kind of a while. Like, I think there's also a tendency to focus on the trauma aspect of Supergirl as a character. We did it a lot in New Krypton. Obviously, her planet died, her dad died. Like, we focused a lot on trauma. And then, you know, she loses her mom, she loses her planet a second time. We did an entire arc about PTSD called Bizarro Girl that was just about, like, literally looking into a cracked mirror version of yourself. And, like, when you feel broken and you see yourself in the mirror, how do you react and deal with that? So when Zor-El says to her, you know, I'm glad I got to see you one last time, you referenced it a few minutes ago, like, that was what I wanted my dad to say when he died. And I literally was doing CPR on him and trying to revive him. Like, that's what I wanted him to say. That's the moment I wanted to get. And I didn't get it. So I gifted it to Kara. Jamal tells a similar story. He had a best friend who was gunned down and shot and killed. And Jamal did the same thing of, like, we made that issue specifically so that we could have that conversation with our lost loved one. And so that's why that issue, to me, that issue is one of the most emotional things I've ever written. That issue and the letter to her dad a few issues later, like, those are me talking to my parent who died, who's no longer with us. And I had a lot of fans when those issues came out come up to me and say, look, like, I lost a parent, loved one. These mean a lot to me. And it becomes this amazing touchstone for people of, like, oh, Supergirl is helping us deal with trauma. And I think there's a tendency sometimes with creators where they focus only on the trauma instead of the inspiration of lifting yourself out of trauma. You know, I wrote that line in the Crisis crossover. Kingdom Come Superman is in the Crisis crossover. I don't know if you watched that crossover.
I did.
Kingdom Come Superman's in it, and he gets back to the Wave Rider, and Lois, our Lois, is like, hey, like your super S, like why is it black? And he's like, oh, because the S is the hope, and the hope is what lifts us out of the darkness. And so like you can be surrounded by dark, and as long as I'm here, I'm gonna lift you out, and you're gonna lift yourself. I'm gonna show you how to lift yourself. Hope is the light that lifts us out of darkness. And I wrote that line and I gave myself goosebumps. I'm like, that is Superman distilled down to, that's everything I've ever thought about Superman in one line. Like in one interaction with Lois from a different planet, a totally different Lois. That is who Superman and Supergirl are to me. Is they're the light that lift us out of darkness. And sometimes they can be dark. It's just how do you approach the resolution of those stories that make it a Supergirl story or not a Supergirl story. Sorry, that's a very long answer to a very short question, but I just like I'm never gonna not root for Supergirl as a character. I'm always gonna be her biggest supporter as best I can, whether that's tweeting about it or, you know, like she means so much to me as a character, and working on her book helped me become who I am as an adult and helped me process through my childhood pain in such a way that like I'm always going to love this character, and I'm always going to want her stories to be awesome so that other people can come to that character and maybe it helps them process through what they're going through or helps them experience joy in a way that they didn't expect or whatever. I'm always going to root for that character. Um, so yeah, Sophie, doing a great job.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that and all of the insight that you shared. I really appreciate your time joining me for this episode, to really be able to shine a spotlight and pick your brain about this specific period of Supergirl comics history, your run on the main title, the new KRYPTON Saga. Really an honor to be able to speak with you. So thank you so much. I'm sure the audience is going to enjoy getting to hear from you and all of the insight that you shared. What would you like to share with audience members if they want to keep up with you and current projects? Any place in particular you'd like to direct them?
Well, I am directing now. I'm writing and directing. I just did a short film called Just the Janitor. It's on the film festival circuit. We're gonna put it online at some point. We haven't figured out when, but it'll exist on the internet at some point. It's a and let me know if you want to see it. I can hook you
Oh,
up.
sure.
I know a guy. Um, and then we just launched. I'm part of this project called Life Anthologies, which is like a little sci-fi show out of Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma originally, born and raised. This guy named Dathan Smith has created an anthology science fiction series that he produces in this small town called Paul's Valley in Oklahoma. We just launched a crowdfunding thing. If you want to look that up, that's all over my Blue Sky. I'm no longer on Twitter, sad face. You can find me almost exclusively on Blue Sky. And then yeah, I just like I have little things coming out here and there, but nothing giant that I can point you to right now. Talk to me again in a couple months. Um, it's a weird time in the year because spring is always quiet, and then all the announcements roll out at San Diego. So maybe we'll talk after that. But yeah, like thank you for taking the time and to echo what you just said, shining a spotlight on Supergirl because I think she's the coolest character possible. Like in DCU, she is many many things to many many people, and it's nice to like talk about my feelings towards that character and like I any day of the week if someone says do you want to write a Supergirl project, the answer is always yes. And so if anyone's listening and they would like and they would like to invite me on their Supergirl project, let me know.
Well, you
But
never
no,
know who's
I think
listening.
I just think she's the best character, and for my money, I think she's the most nuanced and interesting character DC has. And I've talked about that before of just like she fulfills, even her origins fulfill so many roles. And I think the story of a refugee from a dying place taking up residence in America, trying to make their way, I think that's always going to be a relevant story for people. Um, on top of she's a girl trying to deal with her powers and like she doesn't know what she can or can't do. I mean, like she fulfills so many roles as a character that I think people have trouble like deciding which is the thing that's going to define her for their for their take on that character. You know, sometimes she's super angry, sometimes she's super light, sometimes I think people have trouble figuring out who that is. And my theory, and I've said this for years, is it's all of it. She's all of it. No person is all one thing. I can be angry, I can be happy, I can be light, I can be silly, I can, like, no person is one thing. That's a one note character. Kara's, you know, 8 notes, and she's a full scale. Like, we should be telling stories that can reflect all of those things with her. And inevitably, a lot of times she can be played as one note, which is unfortunate. But I think she's, I think she's the whole scale, man. Like, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, all the way up to do. Like, I think she can do anything, and she's a character you can drop in any situation, and you'll find an interesting story to be had with her. And that's why I love her so much. So,
right on. Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, man. Like, you want to talk more about her later? Let me know. I'm around.
Very cool. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. I always appreciate it. Make sure you come back next week. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.